Good morning, Michael.
Morning. Good morning, everybody. It was pretty entertaining watching Jenny in the green room dancing like Saturday Night Fever.
Dancing to
Yeah.
the music. Our little StreamYard music.
There we go.
What did the kids usually say? Stop doing that.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's funny because when they were kids, that was my favorite thing to do would be, you know how they play music in the grocery store?
Oh, yeah.
I would totally be off on.
Oh, yeah.
They would run to other aisles. It was so funny. They were like, "Mom, stop that. Stop it."
Yeah, that's what you need to do when they're bringing all this stuff up, saying, "Hey, I want this," and then you just need to start dancing, and then they just scatter.
This is probably true. But my point is, honestly, Michael, why do you have children if you're not willing to embarrass them? I mean, to me, that's just...
Yeah, I try to do that at every opportunity.
Dancing in the grocery store. I mean, you're talking, hey, this is just perfect opportunity to make those kids squirm. I'm bad. I know. I get it. So how are you today? Are you frozen? You're not frozen. Are you frozen?
Yeah.
Come back, Michael. What is going on? We don't have time. We ain't got time for that today. You cannot be frozen. Oh, no.
Yeah, am I frozen or are you frozen? Was it me?
It's you. It's not me.
I don't know. Well, anyway, I'm glad we have Visit on today.
I am too.
Well, it's me.
It is you.
Well, I'm glad because we have TikTok's #1 uncredited source Visit on, or
Visit Vantage right here.
Uncredited source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You got it. You got it. So we'll bring her on this morning and see what she's up to today. So good morning, Visit Vantage.
Good morning, Jenny and Michael. How are both of you this fine morning?
Yeah, good morning.
Well, when I'm talking about embarrassing my children, apparently I'm doing great.
I'd like to come on at least sometime with a more lighthearted topic, but we have some serious threats to First Amendment freedoms going on in Oklahoma right now.
And I was going to say, I don't think you have any lighthearted topics. Do you? Do you know any lighthearted topics?
Apparently not in my professional life.
Apparently not.
No, we have some serious, what I would call a triple threat facing Oklahomans when it comes to basic freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about how, although Oklahoma it's sort of a misnomer that Oklahoma is some bastion of conservative protection of freedoms. Yeah. It is not. We are watching some really radical tactics among our elected officials to seize power whenever there's a crisis.
Yeah.
Using the power of the individual. So that's what I want to talk about today.
Wait 1 second. So who's in the majority in the legislature in Oklahoma?
By ideology or by which jersey they're wearing?
Well, let's just talk about the jersey they're wearing.
Yes, by far and away. Our state legislature contains majority Republican GOP elected representatives. And that's what's really interesting about today's topic, because it's
interesting or frustrating.
Well, I would say both. As a journalist, you try to stay in neutrality and just look at the facts. But their ability to get into office by playing on the ideals of the majority is very good. When they get into office, they're no different than Washington, D.C., in that they refuse to bend to the will of the people. And particularly some things going on in Oklahoma right now. they will seize any crisis and they will exploit any crisis and they will cross any lines. We truly are the unipeople versus the uniparty now, even on a state level.
So just out of curiosity, Michael, you and I have talked about this a lot on here. Why the uniparty?
Michael, do you have a comment on that? Nope, I think he might be frozen.
I know. I don't know what's going on with poor Michael.
Well,
poor Michael.
Well, my internet is just so bad.
Okay.
I'm trying to fix it. My internet is really bad.
Okay.
Okay. Well, while he's doing that, then I'll just tell you, if the whole idea is one world government, and we know that because David Rockefeller and his buddies have told us that over and over again, that we, the peons, are not smart enough to run this world. And so the sons and grandsons of the industrialists, great American industrialists, must stand up and do this for us because we're all morons. So the way to do that is you have to have one world everything, right? And people, I think, are not understanding. I mean, they get one world government. They're like, oh, yeah. And especially if they're Christians, oh, no, I get that. But here's the thing. In order to get to one world government, you have to have a one world party, a uniparty, right?
Exactly.
You have to have a uni-religion, whether that's one religion or zero religions. It doesn't matter, right? Just so long as it's one, because outside opinions you can't bring those in, because that would be conversation. It would maybe make, people turn on a few brain cells and go, oh, but wait a second, let me think about that, because they don't want us to think, they don't want us to do anything like that. So uniparty, uni-religion, uni-education, all of these things have to be in line. So this is why we have the uniparty now. And I would argue that it's totally a uniparty, because the Democrats oddly do some things that Republicans should be doing, and the Republicans do quite a bit more of what the Democrats should be doing. So There you have it.
Exactly. And when you start to see elected Republican representatives and legislators in Oklahoma using tactics from famed socialist Saul Alinsky and Rules for Radicals to start to censor speech at every level, that's when you have to be incredibly concerned that we're pretty far down the pipeline on this. And being an election year, there's been a lot of speculation about what tactics will be used during this election year to censor speech, and particularly political opposition. And I would say we don't want to rule out that one of those pandemics is censorship at every single level.
Clearly.
Who knows if there's something else coming in the medical field, but for sure the signs are here. I see 3 really specific things that Oklahomans need to be aware of right now that are
good.
Proof of
Tell
this.
us.
So if you will flip to the next slide.
So long as I'm not flipping off the next slide. Sorry, I just can. It comes to my head. I live in a house of boys. So go ahead.
Well, this is Winston Churchill, and no one can definitively say if this often repeated quote actually came from him, but legend would have that he said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And that was at the end of World War II. And the formation of the UN was the goal of exploiting that crisis. Now we see that exact same goal of the UN pushing us toward World War III. So there's some things going on that are eerily similar to this right now at a national level. The Missouri versus Biden case we'll talk about, and why Oklahoma, a bastion of populist conservatism, is on the sidelines. It makes no sense. We'll also talk about Oklahoma State Bill 1100 that is incredibly concerning. It involves the exploitation of the death of Owasso student Dagny Benedict and a very strange rewriting of a bill to something it was not at all before.
Right.
Once the crisis took place, this bill flipped into something it wasn't before. Now you can't see that on the state legislature site. They've taken that part down.
Oh, good.
And it's become a censorship bill. So we want to talk about that. And then for those who think, no, they're just trying to stop bullying. And I do understand that. And all of us who have a heart of compassion for this beautiful child who took her own life, and that this would never be misused. These tactics are already being misused. There's through our judiciary. There's a case sitting before the state Supreme Court right now, has been sitting there for some time, that is exactly this. It's someone expressing their deeply held religious beliefs and being persecuted in the court for it. So this really can happen.
Well, before we go on to that, I just want to remind everybody who tuned in to see Julianne Romanello and the last time she was on last week. We talked about how nonprofit corporations basically take your money just to push their influence and what they believe, their belief system, into schools and whoever, takes that particular grant. And
Yes.
the reason why this works, is because human beings, God has instilled in human beings a heart that is incredibly emotional and feels a lot, like compassion, which is part of the reason why Paul has said, I believe it was in Corinthians, that the heart is wicked among all things, because that's why you were given brain and discernment, because this has to be used in minimum in conjunction with this, but we really have to use this. And what I've seen happen, and with this legislature this year, they are giving away money, my money, your money,
Interesting.
like it's candy. Oh, but we need this person, this kid got this awful brain surgery. We need to give money to make sure that we're researching this type of glioma, and we need to give money to this, and we need to and it's all, and people swallow it because they're compassionate and they go, oh God, I feel terrible about that. We all feel terrible about bad stuff that happens, but the excuse or the solving of that isn't to give away other people's money. That isn't the way you do it, or to give money to a nonprofit that's going to do something you don't want it to do, or aren't even conceiving that it would do, because you're thinking compassionately and not realistically, right?
Exactly. I mean, the way that politics exploits a crisis always has a tug on the heartstrings.
Yeah.
It always does. And that's where we get into some of this virtue signaling that is all emotional. And there's so much research about when we make an emotionally based decision about an issue or about a candidate, it is also extremely hard for us to change our mind later when factual evidence comes up to say this person is corrupt or that was an incorrect conclusion on my part. It is locked into our brain, and you can see it in the people that are fighting for some of these things that will actually take away their own freedoms.
Oh, yeah.
It's very well intentioned, but it's also very strategic from the top down.
But it's funny. I can look at my own life and the emotional decisions that I've made. And I can't think of one emotional decision that I've ever made that ended up working out for me in the end.
It's also why a lot of these exploitations and power grabs focus on youth, because youth because of their stage of brain development, they are more likely to make emotionally based decisions.
Absolutely.
There's brain science to this. We can scan brains, we can see it happening.
Yeah.
And then life experience and brain development take over. And normally that's when in our lives we can admit that we've been taken, we were wrong. This generation seems to be struggling to do that.
Yeah.
So that's difficult. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to go on, if
Okay.
you would, to the next slide and talk a little bit about the case of Missouri versus Biden. So, Missouri versus Biden is a case that was brought by two different attorney generals, Missouri and Louisiana, following the rash of censorship through all the major social media and browser platforms during the pandemic. Well, it may have been those algorithms may have started before it was kicked into high gear. And in particular, as this case moved through the courts, it exposed serious evidence of a wide infiltration of government into the places that we most commonly access our information now.
Right.
So Twitter, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Verizon, Reddit, Pinterest were all censoring information at the behest of the government during the pandemic, during the last presidential election. It even spread to, I had a personal experience that I use personally, T-Mobile as a cellular carrier. And there was a time then when I could not text links one-on-one, you to I, Jenny, from certain publications.
Oh, for Pete's sakes.
And that was uncovered.
Wow.
And there was a lawsuit about that. So even all the way down to one-on-one communication, we were being censored about some topics that were the most important topics to us at the time. So,
well, and I want to point out, because you said it, but I want to jump on it again. This was the government
yes,
in bed with private industry.
yes. Can you imagine if all of the major newspapers had a back door where government officials were just sending them information that they could and couldn't say? That's what was happening here. So straight from the suit, it says,
well, and by the way, I've talked to numerous reporters, and there is that. So
true. That is very true. But we would talk about it out loud in a very different way. Somehow, because all of our information has gone now through the internet, they seem to just have changed the rules. So what they said, that it was hailing from the White House. This is a direct quote from the suit, the CDC, the FBI, and a few other agencies that urged platforms to remove disfavored content and accounts from their sites. Yeah. The platforms complied. They gave the officials access to an expedited reporting system, downgraded or removed flagged posts, and deplatformed users. The platforms also changed their internal policies to capture more flagged content and sent steady reports on their moderation activities to government officials. This went on through the COVID pandemic, through the 2022 congressional election, and continues to this day. And
well,
then
and here's the crazy thing, because we know that the Chinese do the same thing. We know it's been reported. People know it. And people will even say, the censorship, the Chinese government, blah, 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 that they will not recognize it when their own government does it. Like, too big to fail. This could never happen in the United States. We're not China. And that's why people simply refuse to believe it.
Exactly. And the government always has an excuse because it's protecting us. So the government's excuse for this was that it's a pandemic. We're protecting them from misinformation and disinformation. Well, a few years down the road, we know definitively that they censored truthful medical information from the American people who were making decisions about treatment and vaccinations. And they didn't stop there. Yeah. They censored information about the Hunter laptop story. All of that came out in disclosure within this suit about election fraud and just a plethora of other topics that were political opposition to those in charge. The really scary thing about this is that behind the scenes, and actually this came out in the Twitter files, if people don't really understand Elon Musk's role right now, he's going to go down in history books as we enter this greatest battle to retain our individual freedoms under the Constitution. When he purchased the Twitter files, and this suit was already in effect, he funneled he purchased Twitter. He funneled information from behind the scenes to 2 different journalists. Mm-hmm. And what came out was known as the Twitter files. And it was all this communication, this collaboration between the government and these agencies. There was a group of 80 plus members of sort of a interdisciplinary group of different organizations that met weekly. They were government institutions. They were nonprofits. They were all kinds of bureaucrats. They were from the Pentagon. And they had discussions weekly about what they were going to allow you and I to hear and what they were not going to allow you and I to hear. So this is censorship in the greatest form. And now it's wrapped up in this Missouri versus Biden suit, which you'll see at the Supreme Court level. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments on Monday about an injunction. So now we're fighting back and forth, and the government is fighting back and saying, we absolutely need to censor information. So that was on Monday. That was heard.
No.
And Justice Jackson Brown had a really concerning line of questioning where she seemed to say that she agreed that, of course, the government needs to protect us by keeping information from us.
Yeah, but Ketanji Brown's even more liberal than Sotomayor.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, that woman is way left.
So to say that we're going to get some 11-0 decision on this, I don't believe so.
No.
We aren't, even though it's absolutely unconstitutional what's happening. Now, here's the concern for Oklahoma. 40 states have weighed in on this.
40.
Yes. So if you're looking at the chart here, I know it's probably a little hard to see, but on the left, 18 states have filed amicus briefs saying we're in favor of free speech and we're in favor of the plaintiffs in this case. And the plaintiff list has grown. There's media outlets. There are medical experts. There are the 2 states that are still plaintiffs. But 18 states have said, stop. We have an interest in this. No longer can we censor this information in this case. 22 states plus Washington, D.C. on the right have filed briefs attached to this lawsuit that say, of course, the government needs to censor information. And here's why. We are in a censorship civil war, and this case is our battleground. One state, only 10 states haven't weighed in. And ironically, Oklahoma is one of them. Our Attorney General, Gentner Drummond, has not chosen to file in protection of our freedoms. He is staying on the sideline, which is incredibly concerning.
I think maybe we need to start a letter writing campaign or a social media campaign to Gentner Drummond to get him in on this lawsuit.
Yes, that I agree that everyone needs to be contacting the Attorney General's office and asking the question, why? Why has Oklahoma not weighed in? So that's one of this Missouri versus Biden case is something every Oklahoman should be following. Every American should be following. But the next thing that I want to talk about, bringing it down to the state level, if you'll go to the next slide, is this state bill 1100. This is truly astounding.
So it was filed in the Senate by whom? By which senator?
Filed in the Senate by Paul Racino on the Senate side.
Makes some sense.
Which is, he's Southwest Oklahoma City Mustang 45th.
Very, very liberal Republican.
And on the House side is Steve Bayshore, which he is far, far northeast Oklahoma, both Republicans. So up in Miami, I'm not sure the people of Miami are going to be in agreement with what he's pushing here. So this is the crisis here that they have exploited is, again, the death of this precious child who was lost to suicide. So overwhelmed and confused that she took her own life. And I want to say, before I start on this, that her grandmother, people say it's her mother in this case, but it's actually her grandmother, is one of Oklahoma's heroes. Oklahoma has one of the highest rates of secondary caregiving, which means a child for some reason is not living with either parent.
Right.
And our grandparents are taking in kids who've been in unstable circumstances, perhaps traumatized by abuse, This child, now we know, had diagnosed mental health issues. And if you watch the body camera footage of a school resource officer interviewing both the grandmother and Dagny the day before her tragic death, she was advocating for her granddaughter. She loved her granddaughter. My heart goes out to her. I just want to say that she has the heart and support of all of Oklahoma, no matter what these politicians want to do with this.
Yeah.
But the crisis, they're definitely exploiting this crisis. The media pushed a lot of false narratives. So I think we should talk about what first came out about this child's death.
There were a multitude of false narratives about this case.
There were. For one, that the fight was this child being jumped in the bathroom.
Right.
An unprovoked attack in the bathroom.
Well, but I also think for people who don't know this story, Dagny went by the pronouns they, them, and was calling herself Nex, N-E-X, Benedict. Her grandmother, however, in all of the videos that I've seen, refers to her as Dagny.
Correct. When she's being interviewed in that long video from the body cam footage of the school resource officer, she calls her Dagny. She calls her she repeatedly. Never does she vary from that, and never does the child object. This is who she was, observably. So the narrative that she was going by something else seems more like an adolescent trying out different looks. I don't believe that it was her whole life.
And let's stop there. And, Michael can speak to the fact that we've had Dr. Evans on, we've had T.S. Smith on, we've had, who else can I think that I'm missing, Michael, that have talked about this particular issue? I can't think of. Because I thought we'd had 3 people on. Oh, yes. Our other psychologist friend who used to teach at UCO.
Dr. Mather.
Dr. Mather. So Dr. Mather, Dr. Evans, and T.S.S. Smith have all been on our show talking about this explosion of misgendering, creating gendering, the gender explosion. And every single one of them have all said that it's an epidemic, much like the flu would be an epidemic. They catch it from one another. Because when you're in school, when you're in a setting where you are not really an individual at your time in development, you're in a place where there are a whole bunch of other people around you, and you're not sure about yourself and your place in the world. And if you have an untenable home situation, that's not helping anything. And these kids will, if one person decides that they're they them, then 4 or 5 others are going to decide that they're they them. So this is a social contagion, is what it's been referred to. And the kids that go into this, so many of them come right back out.
They do. If left to their own development, they do. If left alone with
or the intervention of their parents or guardians who find them an appropriate mental health provider, not one by the school, not one provided by the school, but an appropriate mental health provider, these kids, generally come out of that. So I think it's important to say that, because we haven't, the alphabet community is the one who's been pushing the narrative about Next being murdered. Essentially, they're not calling it that, but they're pointing in that direction. And I think it's super, super important to point out where the misinformation has been coming from and who wants to generate that. I mean, who would have that kind of desire to generate misinformation? Well, this community that wants everybody to, they believe one thing and they want you to believe the same thing about them, because then that somehow solidifies their position. I am a they, them. You believe that I'm a they, them. Therefore, I am a they, them.
Well, and I would go a step further. Ray Carter at OCPA wrote a really interesting article this week where he talks about this issue. And in one section of it, he talks about cause or effect. And he goes into some of the research about kids with mental health issues being more likely to be drawn to this gender ideology and gender dysphoria as a diagnosis. And then he goes into where school counselors, where these nonprofits, where supposedly the helpful adults are sending these kids once they express these ideas to places like the Trevor Project.
Yeah.
And the social media connection to that called Trevor Space. And he talks a little bit about what they encounter there.
Yeah.
Gays Against Groomers, that group, calls it a pedophile paradise.
Yep.
Because you have adults talking about sexuality with children on these platforms. So I think there are a lot
and no ages are, I mean, they say that this is supposed to be a certain age range and nobody ever checks. So it could be a 54-year-old, talking to a 9-year-old. Nobody knows.
Well, and
it's not monitored.
Language that he was very specific about some of the language that was going on there. Read the article if you get a chance. It just came out on OCPA this week. It is disturbing. You think you've seen it all. It is very disturbing where those kids are led. So you've got kids who are already experiencing instability or mental health crisis, and then they get pulled into gender ideology, and then they get flooded right to where the pedophiles are.
Right.
It's unconscionable.
By well-meaning legislators. Janice Danforth at Moms for Liberty pointed this out the other day, that a group of legislators, Oklahoma Republican legislators, essentially came out with a press release saying how, they were very sad about what happened to Dagny Benedict, and, then listed the Trevor Project as a resource for struggling children.
Yes, we cannot be doing that. So let's pick apart a little bit about this, about what's true and what's not. I was actually out of town and I got a call from another journalist informing me about this child's death. And we talked for just a few minutes. And I said, you can't touch this until the information is real, that there needed to be a delay, but there was absolutely no delay in this. Everyone jumped all over it.
Oh yeah.
We were told about the details of the fight. They're not correct. And the body camera footage absolutely, she says herself, the child says herself, that she didn't have any relationship with these girls that were in the bathroom. They just said something to one another about the way.
And they were younger.
They were younger. They were freshmen, and she and her friend were sophomores, from what I understand, from what she said. And she said that the other younger girls commented about the way they were laughing. And so Dagny Benedict admitted taking her water bottle and going over and spraying it upon them. So that initiated sort of the altercation that took place there. She said that she threw one of the girls into a paper towel dispenser. We know that she had a couple of mental health diagnoses. We got a lot of false information about who broke up the fight, what happened after the fight. We got a lot of false information about the cause of this child's death as being directly related to physical trauma from the fight. A
head injury. Let's just say what they said. Yes, that she had a head injury, and that's how she died.
Exactly. And the narrative became perpetual bullying. And the child herself said, no, I didn't know any of them. And I have to give some credit through observation here to the school resource officer.
Yeah.
When he walked in, he already knew her. Something had came up, normal teenage stuff about a vape, and they laughed about it. She was obviously very comfortable with the security that was there at school. She could have gone to them. He even asked, did you ever report to any school officials, anybody, an adult at school about any bullying? And she said no, that she hadn't. So nothing really adds up. And if we back up from this and not say you want to be on one side or another, say, what do we really need to do? Keep kids safe here? And what are we going to learn from this? So now we know. What do we know now? We know from the medical examiner's report that she died from an overdose of essentially Prozac, the generic of Prozac, and the generic of Benadryl, is what they said. And the 911 call that the grandmother makes when this child is struggling to breathe and perhaps unconscious, I can't tell from the call, said that the child, she said, they asked about medications, and she said, no, she only takes a couple of medications at night. Well, one is the Prozac, and the other was Seroquel. One is a mood stabilizer, and one's an antidepressant. And they can be used, both can be used for a variety, but it's 2 psychotropic medications in a child.
And she's how old?
16 years old. Both of those medications carry a required black box warning that they can cause suicidal ideation, suicide in children and youth. So no one wants to have this conversation about psychotropic medications in children. In children. So that's a very big part of this, that you're not going to see any of this in the bill that's proposed.
We're all a certain age here. When we were children, do you ever, I'm trying to think if there was ever a kid in our school that we did have a kid who died in a car accident. That was pretty tragic. But unfortunately he had been on drugs. So, and hit a telephone pole, but I don't remember anybody in our school that committed suicide. And I do want to point this out as well, that in that particular time, I graduated in 1981 from John Marshall High School in Oklahoma City. And in that period of time between 77 and 81, we had kids with gun racks in their cars in the parking lot that had guns in them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
They weren't thrown off the premises. They weren't told to take their guns home. They weren't cited. They weren't anything. We had kids with gun racks in their cars that were parked on campus in the parking lot. We never, even at John Marshall High School, never had one shooting. We never had one suicide. Not that I remember. Somebody may get on and go, oh, I was there and so did. I can't remember anything. So what's happened, I also don't remember any children on any kind of psychotropic drugs. No, none of the kids that I knew, well, sorry, I'll have to take that back. No big pharma drugs. I mean, we always had the kids at school who were stoners or, whatever. And I think the big ones at the time were pot and Quaaludes, speed, probably.
But you weren't going to a family doctor and having them prescribe something
nothing like that.
Of depression.
No.
Exactly.
No. And we still had, like I said, illicit drugs in school and people doing them. And again, that's not a commercial for illicit drugs. I'm just making the point. That's all I'm doing. Okay. I'm sorry. Please continue. I just want people, who may be younger, who are watching this, to understand that there's been a huge shift. I mean, because the problem with history is this: once you've stepped out of the stream, it's gone by. Now we don't even remember what happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. We don't remember that. This is all brand new. This was not encountered by my generation in any way, shape, or form.
Well, let me add on to that real quick, Jenny, and visit. Now, this may go down some rabbit holes. Maybe people don't want to recognize this, realize this. I've done deep research into this on multiple fronts, especially when my dad was sick with cancer and had some chemical exposure through his workplace and things like that. But we are living in a time of just massive chemical exposure with these kids, everything from food to water to all the drugs these kids take, not just pharmaceuticals, but over the counter, everything else, and all those things, you know, whether you want to believe they're weaponized or not, this is really the first time in history you have just mass chemical kind of adulteration of everything. And like I was talking to a friend just the other day, we were talking about water. I was like, hey, you know, because I had a, you know, like a fluoride is bad for you t-shirt. So he's asked me about it. And
you
so
did?
anyway,
I can't imagine that, Michael.
yeah. Well, anyway, I was just telling him, I said, you know, hey, think about all of the agricultural runoff, all of the chemicals, all the gender bending chemicals. We know that like atrazine and things like that, those are herbicides. They spray them. They get into the water system. I said, your city's job is to sanitize the water. They're not there to filter it. Everything that goes down that drain, whether it's cleaners, drugs, whatever, prescriptions, pharmaceuticals, they dump down the drain, all the chemicals, all the agricultural runoff, all the industrial waste of any kind, all that goes right into the water, goes into the food. They're adding, I mean, look at the thousands of ingredients in all these food and chemicals. I mean, you go rewind back to like your generation, Jenny, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you'd have like maybe 10 ingredients in, you know, on a package, not 100. So to me, we're under just massive chemical assault. It messes with these kids' minds because we know just how easy it is to manipulate. I mean, that's what the entire pharmaceutical industry is about. It's about just a chemical, you know, a molecule basically changing how your body operates. So when these things are in, you know, our everyday food supply, they're look at the vaccine schedule now compared to like 1970. You know,
see, that was what I was going to say. I've posted my oldest daughter, she's 40. I posted her vaccine schedule and there are like 6 vaccines on there. And I posted because I unfortunately had my kids vaccinated when they were babies, and their vaccine schedule is minimum of twice as big.
Yeah. So for me, all these kids, well, everyone, but mostly the kids, they're under a massive chemical assault unless you're just hardcore on organic foods and purity this and products. And like, just think of all the fragrances itself. I mean, everywhere you go, there's fragrance and, you know, those things affect you. There's molecules, there's chemicals that affect you. And it's just that compounding. So my heart goes out to every one of these kids that they don't know their they don't know their gender. They don't know their identity. They're under chemical assault, in my opinion. And I mean, I hate to say it, but that's my second level to all this is, you know, we're under massive chemical assault in this country.
No, I agree. And when you look at data about the drop in testosterone levels with this generation of boys, it's really hard to argue that there isn't something going on, that our kids aren't in sort of a toxic soup of multivariable damage. And then you start to think about the evidence that these children, then you layer over these confusing ideologies, and the children that are expressing gender dysphoria are far more likely to be suicidal. So that places like the Trevor Project will say that's because they're being bullied, but the evidence does not say that. It is much more likely that that's because they're even more confused about their natural identity. So our politicians have now joined that thinking. We have a child who was on 2 drugs, 2 psychotropic serious drugs that are known to and carry a warning for increased suicide in teens. There's the false narrative that continues to be pushed, and it's been dispelled by the child herself in her own words about the bullying and about her relationship with these girls that were in the bathroom. And now it's been pushed to this state bill 1100. And I think people need to know that the timing of this bill was something about helping someone to commit suicide and criminalizing that. Quickly after the death of Dagny Benedict, it flipped into a digital and online censorship bill, which is basically guised as an anti-bullying bill. And the language in it is so nebulous. It says things like, if anyone in a post-electronic communication says anything obscene, filthy, or indecent, anything that someone feels intended to terrify, intimidate, harass, or cause them severe emotional distress. It even says intent to annoy, abuse, threaten, or harass, that they would be subject to these criminal penalties. And they're very broad. This covers cellular, wire, cable, radio, electromagnetic, anything that's on the internet, any social media post, and it connects criminal penalties. The second offense is up to a year in jail and a felony. So
That sounds like Australia.
It does. It does. What they are pushing.
Well, and let me make the point here, because we were talking about this on Twitter last night, as a matter of fact, this particular thing, and engaging with another person about this. If you cause a person to commit suicide, there's no other way but to consider that murder, because if you're an individual and you commit suicide, you do that to yourself. You do that to yourself. Nobody can cause you to commit suicide. And this is where people get crazy. Well, bullying can make people commit suicide. No. You still have responsibility for your own thoughts, your own feelings, and your own actions. You do. That's just the way it is. I brought my kids up with one thing, one platform that was what we built everything else on. And that was, nobody can make you feel anything. Nobody can do that. You are the one who decides what you feel. Nobody has control over your emotions. They simply do not. You do. And here's by way of explaining that and giving you an example. People in the military, like my husband was in the military, they have guns. You can kill somebody with a gun. So they have to be very well trained to learn, and if you keep one in your house, you should be very well trained in how to use one. But the point of the matter is this: you become trained how to control your own emotions, how to control your own thoughts, how to control what you're doing, because you can. Because you can. People can do that. And when people in our legislature, well-meaning, see, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, well-meaning people who want to protect people do this kind of thing, you're essentially saying we don't have any personal responsibility anymore. Everybody who commits suicide then has been murdered, because that's the only way you can parse that out, because a person takes their own life. If somebody else assists that, it's murder.
I agree with you. The part that I cannot speak to is, I apologize, is the well-meaning intention of elected officials. I do not believe that everyone that is supporting State Bill 1100 or Senate Bill 1100 is well-meaning in this,
Fair
that this
enough.
is a compassionate response. One of the things that makes it suspect is the timing of the law taking effect.
Good
So
point.
the law is scheduled to take effect if it passes the House. It's passed the Senate. And what's interesting is only 2 Republicans voted against it. I need to reiterate, this bill no longer is about suicide. It's not if your communication causes someone or influences someone to suicide. There's none of that in there. Now it's just, you can't say things that someone might deem annoying or threatening or harassing.
No.
And that is so subjective. You have to think about who might bring charges on that and their mindset. But the timing of the bill taking effect would be November 1st of this year,
Okay.
4 days before a presidential election. And you start
A contentious presidential election.
Exactly. How in those critical 4 days could this be used by the media? Could this be blasted with people being charged under this then law, if it makes it through the House, of horrible things that will be misinterpreted right before people walk into the ballot box? The well-intentioned nature of this, I have to question. And then I have to say, why our attorney general won't weigh in on the biggest free speech case federally that we've seen in maybe our lifetime. People say that a lot, but arguably in our lifetime. Yet he is so publicly weighed in on Senate Bill 1100. There are tweets in the article that we put up this week from him, just heartbroken about the tragic death. It rolls right into, we've got to do something about bullying. It rolls right into rejecting cruelty of words. And it rolls right into praise for the state Senate for passing Senate Bill 1100. So I don't believe that we have elected officials right now who have any vested interest in protecting free speech at this time. And the timing, you have to look at the timing, but I will move on.
Well, and what happens with that visit when let's say something like that passes? Now you can't say anything that, can be construed as, whatever, it's basically just at the behest of whoever is saying something's happening to them. So now you can't question school board members. You can't question city council members. You can't say this to this person because
election board officials,
they're offended. They feel threatened, they're whatever. So, I mean, this complete shutdown.
It is. It's chilling. Would have a very chilling effect on speech about social issues, about education, and particularly about elections. This is very frightening. And the next thing I want to talk about on this slide is, if you think that this won't be misused, let me tell you, the judiciary is already down this road. There's a case that sits before the state Supreme Court right now, which is Penkoski versus Hayes. And this would be Senate Bill 1100 in action. It is a case of, it came out of the Bartlesville citizens trying to ban adult-oriented entertainment in their most public spaces.
Right.
And it is about a personal protective order, a PPO. And the laws concerning those things exist to protect domestic abuse victims. So the law says you have to have a certain type of relationship to file a PPO. It has to be a family relationship where a lot of domestic abuse takes place, a romantic relationship, or a residential relationship. That was amended when there was a roommate situation in a murder. Okay. So in Bartlesville, District Judge Russell Vaclaw granted and extended a PPO that was filed by the two leaders of a local LGBT advocacy group, Oklahomans for Equality. It was their Bartlesville chapter. And it was basically because a man named Richard Penkoski, who's a street preacher, who had preached against their pride event with drag shows in front of children. And then he had also spoken at the city council in favor of an ordinance that thousands of citizens had said. And it wasn't an anti-LGBT ordinance. It was, we want no adult-oriented entertainment in our public spaces, in spaces that we are. So we're not going to have the strippers convention there. We're also not going to have drag shows there. We're just not going to do that. So he went ahead and put the emergency protective order, and then he extended it based on these two women, which they're married women who run this organization, married to each other, over his recitation online of Matthew 18:6 and Romans 1:32. The women expressed feeling threatened by those scriptures. So those scriptures are Matthew 18:6 is, but whoso shall offend one of these little ones, which believes in me, it would be better for him that a millstone were hanged around his neck and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea, right? And the other one is about the judgment of God. They which commit such things are worthy of death, not only to the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So he's talking about what God, from a biblical perspective, what God will do to people who lead children astray. Not what he would do to them. And he posted on this line, never met these women, had no relationship. Judge Vaclaw was very conflicted. This is him with that entire board of that organization. He would do anti-bullying talks along with them. So you see how the anti-bullying narrative here and the silencing go together. He would go to the high school every year and talk to kids about not bullying online and what's grounds, mean speech is grounds for PPOs and how you go about that. So there's a little bit of a training going on in this town as to how to silence people that you think are hurting your feelings. So he, after our article about his conflict, he recused himself, but the highest district judge in Washington County stepped in. Her name's Linda Thomas, and she extended the protective order to 5 years, which is the maximum.
Wow.
So
over scripture.
And specifically, if you read the court documents, the judge was coaching them to say how they felt about the scripture, to get enough to say, we're going to make this a 5-year thing that should have been dismissed. It doesn't meet the parameters of the law for a protective order. So the Rutherford Institute, who saw this quickly as a free speech issue, took up the mantle, is defending that street preacher's right at speech and religion, and really defending all of Oklahoma's right to speak freely and to worship freely. And that's been sitting at the Supreme Court for quite a few months. We're waiting on a decision for that. But just imagine, once this became legislated law, what would we be seeing in the courts?
Yeah. Yeah, it's bad enough right now that they don't follow the Constitution and they use case law, which is why, a decision in any of these cases in favor of lack of free speech or stopping free speech is going to just screw us all over, because then they'll say, well, in Bartlesville, they found that blah, blah, blah. And you can tell a street preacher that he's hurting people's feelings, and so he can't say anything.
Right. And there may be people who say things in a way that bothers you, but now is that criminal?
Well, and again, and people have, oh my goodness, people come unglued when I say this. So it's kind of fun to say, to watch people come unglued. Back in the day, we had a saying, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words would never hurt me. And my mother used to recite that to my sister and I all the time. Now, granted, I've had people in my family say things to me and it's been pretty hurtful, but here's the point. Me, Jenny, I can say, well, I'm going to let this bother me and I'm going to cry about it. I'm going to reach out and try to get these people, and I'm going to say bad things about them. And I have that option. I do. But the self-reflective personal responsibility option is for me to say, you know what, that wasn't nice and that really hurt my feelings, but okay, so I'll just figure out a way to get used to it and move on. But we don't do that anymore today. Feelings are the only things that really matter. And once you hurt my feelings, you are the aggressor. You are the bad person. There's no self-responsibility here at all. No personal responsibility. It's just somebody else's problem. And this has to stop. It has to stop.
It does. And the part of it that I don't want people to miss is that this is a power grab.
Yes, it is.
And if you think about our attorney general, who doesn't want to stand up for our free speech at the national level, but then backs this bill, and you think about his position as being the one who will ultimately determine, he can pull any case from any county and take it over, who will be prosecuted under this and who will not. This is a very political elected official who now can decide and can, at the behest of whoever he wants to, use this law to target individuals and to silence individuals. It's exactly what our Constitution was written to prevent. And we are living it with them. So one of the things that I found interesting, just the last slide here, is they truly are people who were elected on a platform of conservatism and serving the people. Gentner Drummond's platform included on his site, you can see that he says, I will not serve the political elite. I'm going to serve the people of Oklahoma. That's directly on his site. are using these tactics that are Saul Alinsky rules for radicals, socialist tactics to silence people, and government corruption works in their favor. These are the goals. I know it's kind of hard to see. In the 8th level of control, if you haven't read Rules for Radicals, now would be a great time to pick up that small book because we are living through it. By silencing people, they come to control healthcare. That was part of Missouri versus Biden. What they were taking is true information for us to make our health decisions. Poverty, increase of debt, gun control. How often is a crisis misused to try to take away our Second Amendment rights? Welfare, taking control of everyone's life and making them think that the government is their savior and protector through this really bad legislation. Education, I mean, Common Core, Jenny and Michael, your Common Core is part of this socialist push. Religion, we're seeing scripture can't be recited, or someone is completely silenced and has to stay outside of. Not only was that street preacher silenced, he has to stay away from any event where these women are. That takes him out of the protest movement. One great quote, and I can't remember it exactly, of Saul Alinsky, is that true radicals cut their hair and put on a suit and infiltrate the government.
Yeah.
So it feels like that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's so sad because you tell people this, and again, they still can't believe it. I mean, the communist agenda was actually read into the congressional record. You can actually go and see it there. You can get books about it. People just don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe it.
But
they just say, no, this isn't happening here. We're not China. And then they la, 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 la. It's the craziest thing. You can talk to people, show them stuff. Then, like you said, the Dagny Benedict issue, there is released public body cam footage that shows all of this, that literally speaks against the alphabet soup narrative. And yet these people and the people in the legislature that we elect are responding to the nonsense. And they're either completely, I mean, I think there are 3 options here. They're just completely corrupt. And like you said, they want to make sure that we have no free speech. They're kind of a useful idiot, and they're just doing things, you know, that feel good because they just want, you know, it makes them, right. Or they're just completely ignorant, you know, and they're just doing what people are telling them to do. There are only 3 choices here. I don't see another one. And we've got to stop this bill. I mean, we absolutely do. Again, I'll say it again because it's 100% true. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good intentions are meaningless. And when you write a bill like this, which is very broad and captures all kinds of things, some way you may be saying, you know, oh, that's really great. It'll keep somebody from being bullied. But no, it's not. It's not. Kids are going to bully each other. My goodness. So many people during the Christmas season watch A Christmas Story. And it's partially hysterically funny because the guys are constantly getting bullied by Scott Farkas and his little toady who, you know, hang out along the way and just, you know, beat the heck out of them. This has been going on for years, but all of a sudden, because of the fact that we don't have anything to do, this country is so prosperous, or has been so prosperous, that all we have to do is sit around and gaze at the lint in our navel for entertainment.
If you take this to its conclusion about anti-bullying and no one should say anything that hurts someone's feeling, makes them feel, quote, annoyed, harassed, that would say for our young people that we're going to create a nirvana in which they never have conflict. And that's just never going to be the case. Never. But you hit on something important. What should people be doing about this? Senate, it's now House bill.
So now we have to contact our representatives.
Yes, we do. and be very strong about that this bill went through so resoundingly. 6 Democrats voted against it and 2 Republicans voted against it. The rest in the Senate voted for this. The State House of Representatives needs to be wide awake and needs to hear from as many constituents as possible. There's a link on the state legislature page. Find your legislator and let them know that you will be watching to ensure that they vote no on State Bill 1100. Michael, I feel like you're itching to say something.
Well, you know I am. Well, one thing, don't forget, in Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radical, he dedicated that to the original radical, Lucifer.
He did.
In the epilogue there, or wherever he did. But Jenny and we've talked about this multiple times. And I mentioned this on one of the very first shows that we came in. There's truth, and then there's what you think or feel is truth. And if you look at the kind of psychological term, that's solipsism. But that's where we have been completely encapsulated now. There's the truth out there, and then there's what now the truth doesn't matter. The only thing that's real is this selfishness, this whole view from my own, little mind here, what I think or feel or believe is true. That's all that matters. And we've had such a disconnect of personal responsibility, and we've said it, multiple times. And just like Jenny said, what's funny, Visit, is with my kids, my number one thing that I say, and Jenny knows this, and she thinks it's funny. We know that there's going to be bullies and all these things, but I literally tell my kids, and you'll hear them saying this to each other, but when someone says something, towards them or at them, or, wants to make fun of them, bully them, whatever, they literally just stop and say, tell me more. Tell me more. And it just stops these people in their tracks. But my kids know, I've literally trained them every single day that they're in charge of their feelings. No one else can control. No one else can go into their mind and change their entire chemical set in their body and control how they feel, make their emotions go crazy. 100%, they're in charge of that. And it's so crazy how that victim mentality has just completely taken over this country. But go back to the very start of the podcast. The victim mentality is about control. Yes. Uniparty is about control. When you have victims are controlled people. So when you have victim mentality across the board, it is completely controlled. And we know, we've talked about it multiple times. When you have this bully epidemic is created by this non-bully programming, put into society, just like stop drugs, keep kids off drugs, the whole pregnancy deal, the whole suicide deal that they tried to push.
Remember programs. Alex Newman on, and he had researched that and said the more you talk about suicide, the more kids want to do it or are prone to do it.
Yeah, the pregnancy programs, all of it.
Any social contagion. The 80s was anorexia, absolute social contagion. Yeah. We've even seen some groups of girls who social contagion, all the symptoms of Tourette's.
Interesting.
Which is absolutely amazing at how much the adolescent brain can be influenced by these trends in a very physically manifested way. So it is very frightening that we're taking kids down a road that says the government has to protect you from hate speech, mean speech, and we're denying them the building of the skills that they will need to live in this very difficult world. Yeah. It's extremely frightening. I would add, on top of your listeners contacting their state house representative to stand up against Senate Bill 1100, that they contact the Attorney General's office and express their displeasure for that office's support of a bill that affects everyone's civil liberties and rights to speech. This will also be used against media, against independent media, against the only people telling the truth at this time, the full truth. So when you think about its effects on information and what we are allowed to know, it's chilling.
So it's this case. It's we want him to weigh in on Missouri versus Biden.
We do. That's another good point. Why hasn't he, Attorney General Drummond, weighed in, filed an amicus brief concerning Missouri versus Biden in speaking for the people of Oklahoma and the protection of free speech? And why is he supporting a state bill that does the opposite of what we need him to do on that Missouri versus Biden? It makes no sense. It's a whole other discussion that we won't get into, but you have to start looking at the money.
Yeah.
You have to start looking at the money.
Yeah, don't go there. We'll end up going
Nope.
down a rabbit hole, and it's
Yeah.
already 112. But yes,
Exactly.
no, you're 150% right, for sure. But we absolutely have to. I think the two things that you have to take away from this particular podcast today is you need to write your House of Representatives member immediately. Your representative, tell them to vote no on SB 1100. It does not support free speech. It stems and stops free speech. And write the Oklahoma AG and tell him that he needs to weigh in on the Missouri versus Biden in favor of free speech, no censorship. We need him to support free speech. So there are two things that you need to do after this podcast today.
Exactly. And just to eliminate any confusion, Missouri versus Biden is listed as Murphy versus Missouri.
Oh, okay, good.
In front of the Supreme Court, because the government's fighting back to keep the right to censor. So that's an injunction.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right.
40 states have weighed in. Where are you, Oklahoma?
Well, and honestly, I'm very sad when you look at that slide. Way more blue than red states. So I think, it's extremely concerning. And if you're watching this, you are engaged. You need to tell your friends and neighbors. You need to tell your family members right now what's going on, because we all remember COVID. And we all remember how we were silenced. And this cannot stand. We have to stop this now. I mean, the First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees us our free speech. And it doesn't say we can't do it if it hurts someone's feelings. So those of you who want to pretend that this is all about feelings need to stop, because it's not. It's not about your feelings.
It's not. And here's an interesting twist. Last tidbit. If you look at this chart, at the bottom of the red column that's fighting for free speech is the Arizona legislature.
Yeah.
At the top on the right is the Arizona Attorney General. So we are in the exact same situation. If our Attorney General won't act, our legislature needs to jump into this Missouri versus Biden fight.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point, Oklahoma legislature that's supposed to be red.
Yep. They can be a red, blue, purple. They need to be supporters of the Constitution.
Well, but that's the point, isn't it? I mean, it seems to me you just said that the Democrats did not vote in favor of the Senate Bill 1100. How are we that we're living in a world where the Democrats believe more on free speech than the Republicans in our own legislature?
Apparently we have some old school Democrats in there, at least 6 of them.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you for the platform to tell people about threats to our free speech. And I'm sure we'll be back next month with some new information.
Well, I certainly hope so. And Michael and I look forward to that every month, as do quite a few people who have tuned in this morning just to have you hear what you have to say. So thank you again, Visit, and thank you so much for being out there and bringing all this stuff. If you haven't gone to her Substack, make sure you go to the Substack and see her articles. Get on her newsletter as well. You can do that once you get on our Substack. She has a pop-up box just like we have on ours, and you can put your email address in and get updates from her as well. So anything else?
Nope. That is it for today. God bless and keep.
All right. And you as well. And we will see you again next month.
Thanks.
Thanks, Visit. Bye.
And I hope everybody will go out to her website and donate also.
Yeah, absolutely. For
just
sure.
$5 here or there. I mean, that makes such a huge, huge, huge difference.
It absolutely does. And not only that, you and I were talking about this the other day. You know, we have so many people who are donating to people out of state, you know, and they
Yeah.
donate their podcasts out of state, and they don't donate to people inside the state who have the state's interests at heart. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't, get Joe Rogan or whoever it is that you know, donate to their podcast, you know, okay, but they're not inside the state, and they're not bringing you state specific information like we do. And we just ask that you donate to us as well, or I don't know, instead of whatever, you know, works out. But I mean, there are people in the state that are trying to bring you information about this state for your well-being. And, you know, we need support on that too. So,
yeah. Well, and just to kind of wrap up for me, I mean, ultimately, Jenny, just it's the same old thing. There's truth, and then there's what you feel is the truth. I mean, we've talked about it 100 times. We just call it personal responsibility.
Right.
And I think you said it best. I mean, no one can.
I always say it best.
Yeah, no one can get into your head and make you feel a certain way. Only your interpretation of all those outside influences, whether it's someone saying or doing, or you're hearing something, it's your own interpretation that creates your reality of whatever that situation was.
Well, and I'm going to double down on that. So I have, and one of the kids is going through a personal, is going through an issue with a friend. And she called me the other day and she said, but she's just making me feel. And I went, eh. And she goes, I know. She can't make me feel. I'm trying. And I'm like, but that's all you can do is try. The first step is to recognize it and go, oh, that hurt my feelings. Oh, but wait a second. I'm responsible for how I respond to that. So how am I going to respond to that? You know, and in some cases, and you and I have talked about this before, in some cases, people do hurt your feelings to the point that you're like, you know what, I'm ending that relationship. I just don't think, I mean, I think there's a toxic thing going on here that I don't need to be in the middle of. But you just say, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm moving on. You don't, that person did this to me and that person did this to me. What good is that doing? How is that helping you?
Yeah. Well, it becomes your identity, but I think I want to expand on one little thing you just said. One word that you said is very, very important that I maybe people just kind of missed it, and I want to make sure to kind of accent it. You said the word respond.
Yeah.
Respond to the situation, not react. We live in this instant society. Everything is just an immediate, you know, over the top, blow your head, reaction, go crazy.
Yep.
You know, people would simply just take a second, process, say, is this really what that intention was, or whatever it is, and they respond accordingly and not react. You know, just to me, that's almost just a sense of maturity, because you think little kids, you know, they just instantly, you take their toy away, they go crazy, you know, instantaneous. There's no response. It's complete reaction. And we've devolved into that complete reaction to everything instead of just a thought.
Why?
Well, it's on purpose. It's on purpose.
Easy button.
Yeah.
Easy, but we don't want to do anything difficult. Yeah. And I'm telling you, I mean, I've had people say things to me, and that adrenaline pops up, you know, and it starts surging, and you feel that in your chest, and it's so much easier to go, you know, and just completely lose it. It's so much harder to just breathe and go, okay, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna, you know, and I'll be honest, because I've got Irish background and I can do that. I can go nuts. And the thing of it is it's really, I force myself. in those issues, at those times, I force myself to use monotone language, and I stretch it out, and I do those things because that's the only way for me to get control of myself and my emotions. So everybody has that blow up button. Everybody has that. Everybody has the I'm going to cry about it button. The problem is you can't respond to the button. You have to stop and you have to take control of your own emotions, and you have to use those emotions in a way that aren't going to make the situations worse. And we're not taught that. Anymore, even counselors, well, you need to feel that emotion. You need to feel it to get over it. Well, I'm not saying you don't need to feel it. Like when my mom died, you do have to go through those stages and feel that, but that's me. That's on me. That's not on the people around me. That's on me.
Yeah.
So we have got to start educating our kids in a better way and explaining to them that, no, sorry, you may want the easy button, you may want the blow up button, but the problem is it doesn't work that way. And you are the one that has control over yourself. You can't make somebody take their own life. You can't. You can't. That's their issue. That's not yours. Now, I'm not saying you go around and be ugly and mean and rude and try to push people's buttons. No, that's not okay either. Okay. We're missing a certain amount of civility that we had growing, that I think you too. I mean, you're not that much younger than me. I mean,
about 40 years younger, 30 years.
Okay, take some personal responsibility for come on, Michael. But yeah,
no,
I mean,
I agree 100%. 100%.
We used to have that civility that we just don't have now. It's fine for everybody to drive by and flip people off because they cut you off or scream at them for whatever. It's not okay.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not okay. Okay, now that we've treated our audience like a bunch of 4-year-olds, and everybody's like, I'm getting off of here. I already have them on. Let's talk about what we have coming up on Friday, because we got to pop off of here. So this Friday, we have Ken Malloy, who is coming on. And Ken Malloy is actually the husband of our friend Maria Seidler. He is also an attorney. He has created an organization that helps to kind of police school boards and helps people run for school boards and realize what school boards do. Great organization. He's going to talk to us about that on Friday. So if you have questions about school board, or if you want to hear about what Ken's doing, please tune in on Friday so that you can hear what he's doing. And I think next week, what do we have? Next week we have, I think you and I are going to talk some more about the book issue and what's going on in public schools. So we're going to talk about that on that's right. We were going to talk about where these things are and how you find out about that. And then next Friday, Janice Danforth from Moms for Liberty is going to be on, and we're going to be talking about some of these surveys that are getting handed to your kids in public schools that are deliberately meant to tweak the way they think about things and to introduce subjects to them that they're not ready to have. So if you're interested in that, please tune in. Well, we ask you to tune in whether or not you're interested or not, because you might learn something.
We're programming you. Tune
That's
in.
right. Tune in.
We're telling you.
Tune in. All right, Michael, it's always good to see you. I'm glad we got you back, whatever was going on with your computer.
Yeah, I don't know. Something.
Okay. Well, we will be back again on Friday, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And anything else? Any last words?
That's it. Personal responsibility comes down to personal responsibility.
That's right. All right. Remember that, and we'll see you on Friday. Thanks for tuning in.